To everyone who would be so fortunate as to see this short documentary on Emperor Haile Selassie I and his grandson, Prince Ermias Selassie, Haile Selassie, I believe it would be key to understand how heritage and heritage preservation and heritage promotion is important not only to first persons of African descent, but all of humanity. History teaches that the Solomonic line of Emperor Selassie goes back to Queen Sheba and King Solomon in the Bible, and that Ethiopia is the oldest Christian country in civilization. But in more immediate and more recent years, Ethiopia has been a champion of African development and has been a trendsetter. Emperor Selassie, once he became emperor of that country, was a great modernizer. He abolished slavery. He established the first modern university. He established the first air force in an African-run country. He established the first major airline in Africa. Ethiopia today is one of the most well-respected and safest airlines anywhere in the world. I think together with the Australian airline Qantas, it's either number 1 or 2 in its safety record or safety rating. I recall not too long ago we went to Boeing factory in Seattle, outside Seattle, Washington, and my family and I, when we left the Boeing factory, the first 3 Dreamliners were on the tarmac. They'd been pulled out of the factory ready for delivery, and 2 were for Air Nippon, which is a Japanese airline, and the other airline, the 3rd airplane rather, was for Ethiopian Airlines. So, why it's important that we hear from Prince Selassie? It's important because as people of African descent and those who are lovers of world history in general, it's so key to understand the history of the emperor, the history of Ethiopia, what he meant for Africa in setting up the Organization of African Unity, and which is now been succeeded by the African Union, what he did by visiting Jamaica in 1966. He was the last head of state to visit Washington and to meet with President Kennedy. As a little boy, 9 years old, I remember reading the books and seeing Emperor Selassie right next to French President Charles de Gaulle behind a caisson that took President Kennedy from the Capitol building to St. Matthew's Cathedral and then to Arlington National Cemetery. So it's so important that we understand that history, and we understand the relationship between the United States and Ethiopia, and the relationship between Ethiopia, the Caribbean islands, the African diaspora, and what he meant for Africa. His grandson is the president of the Crown Council, and together with people like Brigadier General Gregory Copley and his wife Pamela von Grubber and the other members of the Ethiopian Crown Council and the Ethiopian Imperial Order Society have been doing their utmost to maintain, to promote, to keep alive the legacy of Emperor Selassie and his modernization efforts for not only Ethiopia but for all of Africa. And it's in that regard I hope you will find value to this interview and that it can be an inspiration to those of us who believe in the importance of Pan-Africanism, African development, and the African diaspora working together on meaningful things that improve the lives of all people, not only in Africa, but here in the United States, the Caribbean islands, and other parts of the world. So enjoy. It will begin, of course, with snippets of Prince Ermias at the Library of Congress, snippets of Emperor Selassie at Georgetown University. My law school was Georgetown. Snippets of President Kennedy meeting the Emperor at Union Station, and also snippets of the 1966 visit to Jamaica by Emperor Selassie, and the 2016 visit to Jamaica by his grandson, Prince Ermias Selassie. So, all in all, a very valuable piece of history, and we thank Van Feliciano of our office and Mr. Conrado Alfaro for his help, and also Dr. Stevens of Georgetown School of Foreign Service, who in 1993 did us great honor by introducing me to Prince Ermias Selassie, who has now become a great friend, after whom my only son is named, well, his great-granduncle, great-grandfather, Ras McConan, whose name I gave to my son Makonnen, and someone who in '97 had the grace to appoint me as a commander of the Ethiopian Lion, an honor that I am very proud to wear and to be, of course, seized of, and to do my best to perpetuate the remarkable legacy of Emperor Selassie and all that he did for Africa and African folks all over the world. Thank you very much. Enjoy.
Good afternoon, friends, scholars, and distinguished guests. It is my great honor and privilege to be here with you today in the renowned Hebraic section of the United States Library of Congress, African and Middle Eastern Division. To begin with, I will share with you an ancient Ethiopian saying: "We must study the past and understand the present to charter a better future for us all." I must tell you that I am not a theologian and make no pretense at being so. Indeed, some, perhaps many of you, already possess extensive knowledge of today's subject, the origins and religious symbolism of the Lion of Judah. Consequently, I will initially introduce the subject and hopefully end with a robust question and answer period, which I anticipate will prove both entertaining and enlightening for all of us. It is with great reverence, humility, and some concern I come before you to discuss and explore this topic. My concern springs from the certain and harsh knowledge that whenever poetry and magic of myth is interpreted as biography, history, or science, it is frequently mortally wounded. The living images become only remote facts of a distant time or sky, and it's never difficult to demonstrate that as science and history, mythology is in a large part absurd. Thus, when a civilization begins to reinterpret its mythology in this way as biography, history, or science, the life goes out of it. Temples become museums or tourist attractions, and the link between the two perspectives is dissolved.
Well, good afternoon,
Good afternoon,
Your Imperial Highness.
Good afternoon.
So good to see you after many, many years of being friends. I think we go back, Prince Ermias, to 1993
Yes.
in Landover,
Incredible.
where you were introduced to me by Dr. Richard Stevens of Georgetown University.
Yes.
And I have
a wonderful human being.
Yes, indeed. So we are very happy to have you here, Prince Ermias.
Thank you.
Prince Ermias Selassie, Haile Selassie, the grandson of the revered His Imperial Highness Haile Selassie I of Ethiopia. This year, 2016, we celebrate 50 years of the Emperor's remarkable trip to the Caribbean. At that time, we visited, I believe, 3 nations, four, Jamaica, Barbados, Haiti, and Trinidad.
Yes.
But I must say that Jamaica was the trip or the visit which had the most outstanding or dynamic response from the national population.
Yes.
I've seen old tape or documentaries of the response of the population at Palisados Airport.
Yes.
When the reception was organized with the troops and the Governor General and the Prime Minister, and the tens of thousands of people surged forward and broke the ranks, and they could have lifted up the plane and carried it. They would have done that. But it speaks to the enormous respect that those persons of Caribbean descent like myself have for your late grandfather, His Imperial Highness Emperor Haile Selassie, King of Kings, conquering lion, someone who was a great Pan-Africanist, great leader of the world, who spoke at the League of Nations against the Italian aggression,
Yes.
who resisted, with the help of the Allies like Britain, the Italian aggression of 1935, and who was able to build up Ethiopia into a modern African nation and the headquarters of the Organization of African Unity, the predecessor organization
Yes.
to the current African Union. So we welcome you to our law firm this afternoon,
Thank
Prince
you so
Ermias.
much. Thank you very much.
And we are very happy to have you here.
Thank you.
And I'm going to ask you a few questions so that the record can be established for posterity with regard to your own life, your contributions, the contributions of the Emperor, your family, and so that persons around the world can hear of not only the great work done in the past, but the work that you're doing now in Africa with regard to your water initiative. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Prince Ermias, can you tell us when you were born and where you were born?
I was born on June 14th, 1960 in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
And who were your parents?
My parents are Prince Haile Selassie, who was the youngest son of Emperor Haile Selassie and Empress Menen, and my mother, Princess Mazen Hapta Mariam, the daughter of the Judge Mike Hapta Mariam Gabriel, and Wezorwishim Mevit Kuma.
Wonderful. Did you have any siblings, any other brothers and sisters?
I'm an only child.
You're the only child.
Only child.
Amazing. Amazing. And tell me, what was early life like? Did you live in the palace or did you live outside the palace?
I lived outside of the palace, but when my father passed away, I lived there for some time. And when my mother on occasions traveled abroad, I also lived at the palace.
Mm-hmm. And your father sadly passed away when you were quite young?
I was very young, yes.
Yes, indeed. I've seen his photograph in the uniform of the Ethiopian Air Force.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, he loved flying, from what I've heard of his contemporaries, and he was one of the earliest ones to take the course and got his wings when the Swedish were training the Ethiopian Air Force.
You know, I must pause here because a couple of years ago we invited you to the Christmas celebration of the famous Tuskegee Airmen. Those are the African-American fighter pilots who fought in World War II in Europe, and they were honored to receive you as their guest.
Yes.
And it was remarked that Ethiopia was the first nation in Africa to have an air force.
Absolutely.
The first African-run country in the world to have an air force.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that and the role of Emperor Selassie, your grandfather, in that process.
Well, he was a great modernizer, so he felt that there's no reason why Ethiopia shouldn't have the defense capabilities to maintain her sovereignty. So to that end, although with the limited resources, he established the first Ethiopian Air Force. And the African Americans, like Julian Herbert and the Black Eagle, all these people.
Yes. And Robinson.
Robinson,
yes.
who
the brown condor.
Yes, from Chicago.
Yes.
Where I last year or 2 years ago I learned a lot more about him. But it captured their imagination, and they came to help Ethiopia to defend herself against Italian aggression, fascist aggression. So it's amazing from what humble beginnings it started to where it is today.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. So since we're on the Ethiopian military, I want to say that this is the first time I have worn, and I don't know if the camera can capture this, I have worn this blazer with the insignia that's shown on it. I'm not sure you can capture it, Mr. Alfaro, but I'm very proud of this insignia, and maybe I would ask His Imperial Highness Prince Ermias Selassie to tell me what it signifies. Certainly, I'm proud to be in that circle.
Well, this is really a symbolic reminder of what the Ethiopian Imperial Guards have done in the past and their proud tradition. But this is only symbolic in that it only functions as a mess.
Yes.
And it gives us an opportunity to honor and discuss the great achievements that the Imperial Guards had performed, and one of those most visible and historical things has been the fight in Kanyo, the Kanyo Battalion's fight in Korea.
Yes.
It was not the regular Ethiopian army, but it was the Imperial Guards who performed very valiantly there, and who was proud.
Under the United Nations banner.
Under the
Yes.
United Nations banner, and they won the respect of many nations, including the United States.
Indeed.
Yes.
Well, and so I just want to compliment you and, of course, Brigadier General Copley for the whole idea of the heritage perspective.
Yes, absolutely.
Because we need to promote the heritage
Yes.
of our civilizations. And Ethiopia, for those who may not know, is the oldest Christian nation in history,
Yes.
going back to King Solomon and Queen Sheba in the Bible. And so that Solomonic line is something that I'd like you to take a moment to speak to, for those who do not know the legacy of the imperial family in the Solomonic line.
Well, according to tradition, that the imperial family is descended from the union of Queen Sheba and King Solomon, and their son Menelik I was the first to establish the Ethiopian dynasty. And the tradition of monarchy and the Solomonic dynasty had been active on so many fronts. Really, they preceded religion, but it was also King Ezana who in the 4th century accepted Christianity as the basis. So we're one of the oldest Christian countries in the world, with a very proud tradition. And also one of the first to welcome the Prophet Muhammad's followers when they were being persecuted in Mecca at that time. So Ethiopia has since really fostered very close affinity in the tolerance amongst different religious groups.
Yes, and this is very important
Yes.
to say now in the 2016 period, where there's so much tension because of course, terrorism by those who claim to be Muslims or who are not following the teachings of Muhammad, and the Christian community to know of that history of tolerance by a great nation.
Yes, it's so sad where we have reached, because the tradition is completely the opposite, and that states or personalities revered that there is a creator, and that all respect should be given to that, and that tolerance was one of the first precepts of faith, that
Yes.
to accept the disadvantaged, to accept the refugees, to accept the faith of others, and these are very important things. I think we can learn a great deal from
Yes.
From the past.
So you're saying that your grandfather and the Ethiopian people over the centuries have been great practitioners of that principle of tolerance between different religious groups.
Yes, in fact, one of His Majesty's biggest saying is that the country is for everyone, and religion belongs to the individual.
Yes, yes.
So
That's quite wise.
The famous.
Yes. The country belongs to everyone, and religion belongs to the individual.
Yes.
That's wise. Tell me a little bit about, we'll get back to your childhood now.
Okay.
You went to elementary school in Addis. Were
Yes.
you lectured privately or in a public school setting?
I was in it was a kind of private school, but I went to the German school. So outside of Amharic, I started my academic career in German.
And that's very interesting, because the Ethiopian emperor, Haile Selassie, was very much not just a modernizer, but his brand was really education. Tell me about his role in providing this enormous opening in education, including the founding of the university, the modern University of Ethiopia.
Well, he for many years held the portfolio as Minister of Education, so as such he was at the forefront of leading the educational expansion in Ethiopia. He did send many Ethiopians abroad to be familiar with the ways of the world, to learn skills, to learn how the world functions. A lot of them came from very humble backgrounds and reached the highest levels of government posts and administration. And it was very amazing, I think, that he would give personally his own home, which was his father's, Ras Makonnen's home, as the first university in Ethiopia. And it also provided scholarships to Africans after the countries became independent, and today you have many African leaders all over Africa who attended the Haile Selassie First University. So I think that speaks a great deal to his legacy.
Well, which brings me to say that I'm happy to know that it was the home of Ras Makonnen
Yes.
that was used as university. As you know, in my home there is a Makonnen, my only son, and of course we named him in honor of Ras Makonnen, your great-grandfather, and in tribute to our relationship, which we are very honored to have.
Thank you.
For a moment, can you give us the sort of profile of Ras Makonnen and his importance in Ethiopian history?
Well, Ras Makonnen was the last governor of Harar under Menelik, Emperor Menelik II, and he played a vital role amongst many prominent Ethiopian patriots during the war against the Italians at Adwa, and that's really what propelled him. He was also a very able diplomat, so he basically was a modern-day foreign minister for the Ethiopian state at the turn of the last century.
Yes, indeed. And so we're coming now to the 1960s. You're at a German school, and what's the next step?
Next step, I was sent, when I was 11, I attended prep school in England.
Is it Haile?
No, it was called the Old Ride. It was outside of Bath, where my grandfather and my dad and my uncles were all in exile, and my aunts. So
that was during the Italian aggression.
During the Italian aggression.
Yes.
So I think that was the first choice of getting accustomed to England. So I was there for 2 years.
Yeah. What was that like?
It was very difficult. It was
the language,
the language primarily, and then just the discipline involved. We had to take runs and take cold showers before breakfast, and it was something I wasn't very accustomed to.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So you were there. What were the students? Where were the students from? Were they all English, or were they from?
No. They were mostly very English. It was mostly very English from sort of that part of England. So.
I see.
Yeah.
You didn't have an international crowd there.
No, I did attend with a cousin of mine, so that was one familiar face I knew going in.
Yes. So before you went to Bath at the Ride-in School, it was called?
The Old Ride.
The Old Ride.
Yeah.
Before that, can you give me any sense of the being in the palace and how it would be in the palace, any of the celebrations, your interaction with your grandfather?
Well, of course, there was strict protocol, but despite of that, I remember driving through the cities with him, when he used to open different factories or different institutions, hospitals, etc. And also, he loved visiting the School for the Blind, which he was a patron of. So I remember those.
It's interesting. My mother was the manager of the workshop for the blind on Dominica.
It's amazing.
Yes, we are actually putting something together in that regard. More about that later.
He was very involved with that, and we as children used to serve the students there with some refreshments that was brought from the palace, and we were the one who used to go and pour the sodas and bring in the bread, whatever was there. So I remember that. I remember, of course, visiting the zoo, which is very exotic.
Yes. Was the zoo on the palace grounds?
Yes.
What animals were there?
There were from peacocks to lions to cheetahs to a very exotic chimpanzee. Of course, there were the impalas, indigenous animals that belong to Ethiopia. So it was very, very exotic.
So once you were done with the ride, the Old Ride,
yes,
what was the next step for you?
Then I attended, I think, a grammar or what they call a tutorial for 6 months in Sussex, and I went to Aylesbury College. By that time, of course, I spoke reasonably well English, so life was a lot easier.
Yes. Haile is in London?
It's just north of London.
So Prince Ermias, you're at Haile. You're now how old?
14.
14.
Yes.
Yes, and then tell me what happens at that time, because I know in Ethiopia there was difficulties in the early 70s, and there were changes that came. If you can give us what you know of that.
Well, it was shortly, I entered, I think, the school in January, and the creeping coup, as it was called, started in February.
And that's with the army.
With the army.
And at that time, it's people like Mengistu.
Well, no, Mengistu wasn't prominent at that point, but it was the rise of army officers were requesting pay rises and that kind of thing. So you could see, and it was very sort of surreal for me to be in the library, and the headline news would be about Ethiopia, or the BBC commentaries would be all about Ethiopia. And having just returned from there, it was just unbelievable. Of course, I think the worst happened, the execution of the 60 government ministers in November that year, of course.
Well, any of those people who you knew or who related to you?
Of course, a lot of them are related to me, including my first cousin, who was Admiral of the Ethiopian Navy, my step-grandfather, who I know growing up, my other relatives, and of course I was very familiar with most of the other people, so it was a very traumatic time.
And why? I know there had been a farming in Wollo province, and the allegation or the criticism of the emperor was that he did not care enough about that. People said he was feeding the lions and not feeding the starving people. Some of the allegations, of course, were quite, I think, overblown, but give it to me from the perspective of someone who was on the inside.
Well, I mean, I was young at that time, but from what I heard from very credible sources was that some of it was hidden from the emperor, the extent.
Because at that time he was old.
He was also very old. He was 84 plus, and he, I'm sure, was extremely saddened when he went to visit the camps in Millo, which is was often my grandmother's province, and I think the Jonathan Dimbleby, who still is with the BBC, and the communists used the footage very cleverly to contrast images and kind of, as you mentioned, deceive the Ethiopian people that this was a careless leader and that there were feasts going on while people were starving, and use very selected images to convince the population. Of course, there was a lot of restlessness and need for change.
I must stop you here because, it was apparent that you had the military with its own concerns for its bases.
Yes, absolutely.
But in the university, the same university system that the emperor had set up, some of the students were sort of on the left, and they did not appreciate the legacy of Ethiopia in its monarchical system and the role that Ethiopia had played and the role that the emperor had played. Can you comment on that?
Well, I mean, that is very true. And having spoken to some of those students since, a lot of it is that they were very impressionable minds. A lot of them didn't have the historical background and education on Ethiopian history. And unfortunately, they were very fertile minds to receive propaganda without having really questioned what it was all about. And of course, everybody liked the excitement. Who doesn't at 18? Everybody wants to be a rebel. So I think that also, it wasn't thought through, and it was very unfortunate we lost some of our brightest people during those.
Because the irony is, some of those same people who were against the emperor and who may have aided the restlessness that led to the overthrow of the emperor, what happened to them under the Derg, which is what the military was called under Mengistu?
Well, it was one of the darkest periods in Ethiopian history because they were ruthlessly killed and their bodies left on the streets, and the parents had to pay for the bullets to collect the bodies. So it's probably the most tragic and dark period in Ethiopian history.
And this is important for history to record for posterity, because oftentimes those who make the revolution are devoured by it, because in a way they created the atmosphere for the rise of the Derg, unfortunately. And prior to that, when they were in Ethiopia under the emperor, they were able to go to school.
Yes, yes. Well, they were able to go to school also during a period of relative peace. I mean, the generation before, under the Italian invasion, they forget, was not allowed to have education beyond 5th grade. So it was only in time of peace that you're able to have, a situation where you can get an education, a continuum. And I think that that's the big tragedy, that we had lost some of our brightest students during the Italian War, and again, we lost them in 74. The revolution, as you rightly said, devoured those people.
Yes.
So,
yes. Except those who maybe were able to escape.
But yeah, of course. But by and large, what had transpired was sad. Not only just the student massacres, but the continuing civil war, both in Ethiopia and in Eritrea, did really finish a whole generation of Ethiopians.
And not to focus on that to the exclusion of all the other positive things that the emperor did. How does history reflect on that period of 10 years or 20 years that the Derg was in power? I guess from 75 to
75 to 91.
Yes.
Well, I think in fairness, what the Derg had done is spread literacy. But apart from that, I think it was a very ruthless regime. It was a regime that didn't know how to negotiate and believed in force. Politically, it was immature. It lost Eritrea. And I think it was its own worst enemy, because in many ways they isolated Ethiopia, and that isolation led to more poverty, the worst drought we've ever had, the worst famine. And, I think it pulled us 30, 40 years back. So that is on record, the legacy of the Derg. They did not respect the rule of law. They would take the law into their hands.
There was no opposition parties or free press?
Absolutely not. And
no parliament?
They would execute you on the spot, no due process of any kind. And I don't believe those people ever have received justice. They've been in prison, but I think a large majority of Ethiopians feel that definitely true justice hasn't been meted out for the crimes they have committed.
Yes, and Prince Ermias, that was a dark time for Ethiopia, but change came.
Yes.
And Mengistu had to leave. Of course, Eritrea went on its way. But if you can just give us some comments before I get back to your work in education and science and technology, give us some comments on Ethiopia since and how it has moved and the things you have been able to observe.
I'm very happy to say that I never thought I'd ever return to my country. So having established my citizenship back.
When was that? Can you tell us?
I believe it was close to 2000. Mm-hmm. So, and having now visited 3-4 times, it's remarkable that we've been allowed to retain our Ethiopian citizenship, and also to see for our own eyes the growth and the development that's taking place in Ethiopia.
The language is French. The degree is Doctor of Humane Letters. The place is the United States. A world leader and educator is being honored. His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie I of Ethiopia. He is no stranger to the atmosphere of learning found on the campus of Georgetown University. Here, students are in direct association with world-renowned scholars in the field of foreign affairs, the arts, and the humanities. Here, the inquiring mind finds nourishment. During the 8-day visit of Haile Selassie to the United States, he will participate in many ceremonies that demonstrate the respect of a friendly nation. A train with several private cars carries the Emperor and his official party swiftly to Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. This will be the first meeting for President John F. Kennedy and Mrs. Kennedy with the man who played a leading role in the creation of African unity.
Ladies and gentlemen, I know I speak in behalf of all of my fellow Americans in welcoming His Imperial Majesty back to the United States. Since His Majesty visited the United States nearly a decade ago, we have seen one of the most extraordinary revolutions in history, and that has been the appearance on the world scene of 29 independent countries in the short space of less than 10 years, including over 150 million people. The conference recently held in His Majesty's capital served, I think, to bring together in a great cooperative movement the people of most of these countries. And the success of that conference was due in no small part to the leadership of our distinguished guest. His efforts to move his country forward and provide a better life for its people, and his efforts throughout the world, which stretch back over 30 or 40 years. For all of this, Your Majesty, we take the greatest pride in welcoming you here. You do us honor, and I can assure you that there is no guest that we will receive in this country that will give a greater sense of livelier pride and satisfaction to the American people than your presence here today. Your Majesty, you're most welcome.
So, Prince Ermias, right before the break, we were talking about your trips to Ethiopia. You've made 3 trips.
Yes.
And in one of those trips, you actually was part of the ceremony that reinterred the remains of His Imperial Majesty.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, I think that was a very important closure for the family and also for the country, because we had never known the true extent of what had happened to the Emperor's remains. And it was important in 2000 to have his remains being interred at the Trinity Cathedral next to my grandmother. So that was an important occasion. And since then also I've had the opportunity of going back and forth, which has been very nice.
And we'd asked, well, we know that the period of the Derg, of course, there was a lot of anti-monarchy propaganda, but how do the young persons you would have met, how did they react to you?
Well, I think His Majesty's legacy is still very controversial, remains controversial, but you either have one generation that had been brainwashed by bad propaganda during the military regime as to that regime and the emperor were, completely demonized, and that's all they know. And then, thank God, today more Ethiopians are writing about that period. So you have a new generation now who are able to at least balance things and see it from different perspectives or you have a generation that's completely disconnected from their history. So it's a challenge.
On that point, I have two books here. The first one I make reference to is King of Kings, The Triumph and Tragedy of Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia by Asfa Wassin Esarati. And of course, it has a picture of the younger emperor at the back. Ambassador, who is Asfa Wassin Esarati?
Asfa Wassin Esarati is a dear cousin of mine.
Yes.
Who recently published this book, and he's done a lot of research. So I think it's books like this now that bring a certain amount of truth or shed light into certain aspects of His Majesty's reign and that of his administration. He's not the only one. There have been others, ambassadors. Ambassador Zode comes to mind, who's written his books in Amharic. So that's been also available to scholars, historians, and others to reflect on and also understand that period of history.
Let me ask you, what would you consider to be the best book in the English language on the emperor in the way of balance?
Difficult question. But I've always enjoyed Professor Spencer's book Ethiopia at Bay, because I think that goes into depth about the emperor's role both at the League,
and when you say League, you mean the League of Nations.
The League.
Of course, when he made that famous speech
Yes.
condemning Italian aggression on
Yes.
Ethiopia,
Yes.
and asking the League to come to the aid
Yes.
of Ethiopia, almost as a warning that was not heeded, that led, of course, to
Yes. To World War II.
World War II.
World War II, and also I think the end of the League and the beginning of the United Nations,
Yes.
which Ethiopia was one of the founding members.
Yes.
So and then he talks about the UN and the UN's role in the question of Eritrea, the federation, the unity, and it's a very interesting read that I think every Ethiopian should read to get a better understanding.
Now, before I go on into maybe talk about OAU and a few other things, I wanted to show you this book. It's called The Battle of Adwa. The Battle of Adwa, African Victory in the Age of Empire. And I must say that Adwa was a splendid victory. I think in history it's recorded as the first victory of an African army over a European army. That is when the Italians were defeated in 1896.
Yes.
And of course, there are many historians who will say that in 1935 they were coming for revenge for Adwa.
Yes.
Tell us about Adwa.
Well, I mean, it's very auspicious that today should be the 75th anniversary of Victory Day.
Okay, yes.
So Adwa was the precursor to World War II.
Yes, because Victory Day is May 5th.
May 5th, exactly.
That's right.
Exactly.
Victory in Europe.
Victory, the day the emperor entered Addis.
Yes, the day the emperor entered Addis. Yes,
and
yes.
it was very heartwarming to see that it's being officially celebrated in Addis today. And but to come back to Adwa, Adwa was the precursor to World War II.
Yes.
And I think it was the first time an African army would win a battle against a highly mechanized Western power. So it caused a large embarrassment for the Western world.
Yes.
And it sort of forged, in a sense, Ethiopian sovereignty, Ethiopian pride, because all parts of Ethiopia participated in the battle.
Yes, so it brought the country together.
Yes, it did bring the country together. And I think to this day it's one of the most historically important part, not only in Ethiopia but throughout the world, because it captured the imagination of all oppressed people around the world.
Yes.
Because this was a battle that nobody would have conceived some army in Africa would win, and
Yes.
that it showed it's possible to win.
And so, in a way, it precipitated the whole Pan-Africanist concept
It did, in
of
many
Africans
ways.
at home and abroad working together.
It did in many ways.
Yes.
It did. I think a lot of people took inspiration from that.
Marcus Garvey, for
Marcus
instance.
Garvey is the number one, yes, absolutely.
At last, to the most rousing, boisterous, tumultuous welcome ever given to any visiting or local celebrity, His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie I, Emperor of Ethiopia, arrived. The crowd erupted into a frenzy of rejoicing as they broke through the lines of soldiers and police and surged out onto the tarmac, eager to engulf the emperor with their affection. The ceremonial welcome that was planned had to be abandoned as the avalanche of men, women, and children swept away all semblance of order. Ethiopia, a monarchy on the eastern side of Africa, has been governed since 1930 by Haile Selassie, whom history records as being a direct descendant of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Jamaica was among the places visited by His Imperial Majesty on his tour of the Caribbean area. Huge crowds jostled for choice vantage points all along the route in the hope of seeing the emperor. George VI Park, thousands also awaited his arrival. The cenotaph, His Imperial Majesty laid a wreath in memory of Jamaicans who gave their lives in both world wars.
Yes,
Absolutely.
yes. So I'm going to move forward, sort of a little faster forward. And we're here today, this year, the 2016, is the 50th anniversary of the visit to the Caribbean by your grandfather, His Imperial Majesty, Emperor Haile Selassie I. Tell us about your recent trip to Jamaica, which was to celebrate that auspicious occasion.
Well, I did get a glimpse of what it must have been like for my grandfather to have felt the warm reception accorded to him by the Jamaican people and especially the Rastafarian community, because I was also received extremely well, and I hadn't expected it because 50 years is a long time.
Yes.
But
and it's interesting, the government of Jamaica at the time, 50 years ago, was the Jamaica Labour Party, and they just got into power office a couple of months ago.
It's unbelievable.
It's interesting.
It's just very, very interesting. And really, I was very happy to have been received so warmly by the government. And, you know, the people were remarkable. And it gave me also an opportunity to thank the Jamaican people and especially the Rastafarian for having kept the legacy of our family in Ethiopia alive.
Well, let me just take a moment to talk about the Rastafarian community, because you know the Rastafarian community sometimes is met with a lot of resentment by some of the more established classes in the Caribbean. Rastafarian comes out of Ras, which is Amharic for Duke or Noble General, and Tafari, which was the given name of your grandfather, His Imperial Majesty, was first known as Ras Tafari.
Exactly.
And then, of course, after he became emperor, he became emperor, His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie the First.
Yes.
So I tell people when the newsreels went out and they saw the coronation, they remembered Gavi's message and prediction that the king would arise in Africa, and here in their eyes was the manifestation of that, and they joined the two words Ras and Tafari and made one word Rastafari.
Yes.
Plural.
A lot of people don't know that.
Yes, plural Rastafarian.
Yes.
And saw your grandfather as the epitome of Pan-Africanist pride, and many of them revered him
Yes.
as a god.
Yes.
I mean, it may not be the position of the family, but that's
No, of
how
course.
they consider it.
Yes.
And they did so in particular
Yes.
after the defeat of the Italians
Yes.
in 1935. So they came out in Jamaica.
They did. They came out. They received me extremely well. My wife was with me. I had the delegation also with me, both Ethiopian and others. The airport scene was unbelievable.
Tell us about the airport scene.
Well, I think there was.
Were you at Kingston, Norman Manley?
Norman Manley. So as I was walking out, the Minister of Culture said that you have a lot of people who are here to receive you. So I thought maybe 20, 30 people. So I was kind of shocked when I saw about 200-300 people there, and chanting, drumming, flying the flag.
The royal standard,
It's
the Lion of Judah,
yes,
which is different from the flag that Ethiopia has now.
yes.
And frankly, that's the flag that we know.
This is the flag of, I think, liberation.
Yes.
And so
In Dominica, I will say to you that it's sold in Dominica at shops.
it's incredible.
Yes.
It's incredible. And carried
People will wear the Lion of Judah.
with. I saw a lot of people wearing that and the images of His Majesty, and it was so heartwarming to see that, and that love that never has subsided or disappeared, that it's continuing, and so it was an overwhelming experience.
Yes, indeed. And you said to me you were able to go up to the Maroons.
Yes, of course. I visited so many places in the span of 9 days, but one of the highlights was also the visit to the Maroon country up in the mountains. And,
The Blue Mountains.
The amazing culture and pride that these people have maintained to this
And of course,
day.
the Maroons are the Africans who escaped slavery and
Yes.
formed their own government in
Yes,
the mountains.
yes.
It's amazing.
Yes, it's
It's
an amazing thing.
Yes. And you also visited a school that Emperor Selassie donated to Jamaica.
Yes, that was actually a very emotional day for me, because that school is on the margins of the worst part of Kingston, and to see that school has produced great athletes, doctors, professors, and all kinds of people under such challenging conditions was really heartwarming, and I was really happy also to be receiving the keys to Kingston there, because I couldn't have thought of a more appropriate place to receive that.
That's wonderful.
Yes.
And you said the former Prime Minister Golding had been at the first reception in 1966
Yes.
and was alive to make commentary on that.
Absolutely, and he spoke about the speech my grandfather had done at the United Nations called War,
Yes.
and its relevance to today, which I think you could hear a pin drop, because it was so eloquently put.
Yes. Of course, that speech was turned into a song by the Right Honourable Robert Nesta Marley,
Yes.
otherwise known as Bob Marley,
Yes.
which became the anthem of my generation
It's incredible.
in supporting African liberation movements.
It's amazing.
Yes.
It's amazing.
I remember that speech very well.
But people don't connect the two. That they don't know that it was the speech.
The song came from the speech.
yeah.
Yes, the speech came first.
Yes.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. Prince Ermias, you had a wonderful reception in Jamaica. I saw you there with the Minister of Transportation, I believe, Mike Henry, who interestingly is related to my clients, Homer and Donald Henry and Joe Henry, is the brother of Mr. Henry. It's a small world.
It's a small world.
Yes, indeed. And the Minister of Culture.
Babsy Grange, who never left our side, and wonderfully warm and very effective Minister of Culture, and really enjoyed her participation at most events with us.
Because, you know, I believe, and I stand to be corrected, the visit of His Imperial Majesty to the Caribbean 50 years ago, I believe was the first visit by an African monarch to the Caribbean, and most likely the first visit of an African head of state to the Caribbean in history.
And I didn't know.
Yes, and these islands, Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, had only within the past few years obtained their independence from Britain.
Yes.
Haiti, of course, was the first independent black nation outside Ethiopia.
Yes.
Because of the slave revolt,
yes,
led by Toussaint Louverture and Jean-Jacques Dessalines and Henry Christophe.
Yes.
So it's not part of that group of the British Islands.
Yes. But
I know he visited the 4 islands. And so how did you feel within that warm embrace?
Well, I felt what really the meaning of how a marginalized part of the population in Jamaica who had suffered so much, even I hadn't realized the extent of it. Story on Pinnacle, and the fact that now it's being integrated into the society, and that the fact that the government's considering making them heritage sites. Mm-hmm. This is a very welcome development, because, after all, Jamaica has to integrate in totality.
Yes.
And the very marginalized, persecuted people also need to be recognized. Yes. And what I felt, for instance, having met some survivors of some of the atrocities that happened in Jamaica, was a very moving experience for me.
Yes, yes.
So,
yes. Because even in Dominica, where I was born in the 1970s, because of certain occurrences, the killing of an American tourist that was sort of ascribed to our leader of the Rastafarian movement, Desmond Trotter, who later on went to Ethiopia, Tashmani.
Yes.
There was a law passed called the Dread Act, the Unlawful and Prohibited Societies Act, which made it legal to take the life of any Dread if they were found on public or private property with no civil or criminal liability.
It's amazing.
So people had their hair cut and so on. So the Rastafarian movement has had a difficult time.
Very.
Of course, smoking and marijuana is illegal. Yes. I have a position on that. I believe that one should not take mind-altering substances. But where we can take marijuana as a plant and put it through the pharmacological engineering process and set up a National Institute of Pharmacology and have it be brought forth as a beneficial product for mankind, why not? Mm. And then have the Rastafarians be employed, and you then have an export product, and you can then become the leaders in extracting from that herb that which is beneficial for humanity. Mm-hmm. And therefore the Rastafarian community can move from being a marginalized community to being a productive element in society.
Yes.
Because we have to remember the Rastafarians, by their homage paid to your grandfather, represent a high level of Pan-Africanism,
yes,
self-love,
yes,
and pride in an African heritage, when in the colonial slave period people were told to disregard their African heritage.
Yes.
And so speaking to you, who is linked by blood to someone who founded one of the founding members of the Organization of African Unity, is a great honor. And it was a great honor for me to see you being received by the Rastafarian community and the government of Jamaica. You see? Because the government took a particular interest, and Culture Minister Babsy Grange was there, as was Mike Henry, yes, who's a very senior, yes, parliamentarian and legendary parliamentarian. I think he's the longest serving, I was told by his relatives, the longest serving parliamentarian in Jamaican history.
He
He's never lost an election or something
he
like that.
remembers as a young man the visit of His Majesty to Jamaica too.
Yes, indeed. And let's talk then about the Orthodox Church. Is there an Orthodox Church in Jamaica?
There is.
Ethiopian Orthodox
There
Church.
is. This is one of the most important legacies of His Majesty, was the creation of not just simply the school, the Haile Selassie High School, but the foundation of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church in the Caribbean. Now it enjoys presence in Trinidad and Tobago, in Barbados, I'm sure elsewhere, but I'm aware of these two. And he sent a very able bishop, Abune Isaac, to establish this church. And he's buried right there on the grounds. And today it was wonderful to see some Rastafarian members also attending the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, because His Majesty was, after all, defender of the Orthodox faith.
Yes.
And as such,
So that's churches in Kingston?
in Kingston.
Wonderful. Yes, because I think Bob Marley, when he died, took the name behind Selassie, Light of the Trinity, and was baptized in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. In fact, I think his funeral service was conducted by
Abune Isaac, absolutely.
So the same
one.
Oh,
yes. He
amazing.
was his father confessor.
I see. Interesting. That's interesting history.
It's interesting.
Yes, indeed. And of course, you got to meet members of the family of Bob Marley.
Yes, I did. In fact, I had a very wonderful reception at the Bob Marley Museum, where I met some of the diplomatic community, and including some Ethiopians who live in Jamaica. And there was this wonderful showing of His Majesty's visit to Jamaica.
I see, at the reception.
At the reception afterwards. And then a wonderful movie by Bob Marley's granddaughter, Denisha, who did a fabulous job about what Rastafarians is in the different corners of the world. It was a big education for me.
Okay, so many people don't know that there can be found now Rastafarians in Sweden and in Japan.
In Israel, which I wasn't aware of.
Yes.
In Israel,
Yes.
in Japan, and so she was connecting the dots of different countries. And, how they intersect culturally. And so forth. So that was fascinating.
Yes, indeed. I want to take a moment now to step back and look forward at the role of the emperor in education. We talked about that, but science and technology in particular. We talked about Air Ethiopia. Now Ethiopia has opened a space center. A space center.
Absolutely.
And you're doing something with space technology. That's very fascinating.
Yes.
Tell us about the Aquanaut.
Well, what we're trying to do is involve people to transfer the latest technology, especially in the water purification side, because in Ethiopia a lot of people are victim to contaminated water. A lot of our illnesses are waterborne, and there are sufficient technologies available to prevent that. So we've looked to NASA in developing water purification system. We had a couple of scientists who work with NASA, very prominent ones, help us in establishing these systems. So we're looking forward to greater collaboration and making sure that these systems really do benefit and transform lives in villages in Ethiopia, across Ethiopia.
Yes, and that would be under the auspices of His Imperial Highness Prince Ermias Selassie's Haile Selassie's Water Initiative for Africa.
Yes.
So that villages and schools
Yes.
could have access to clean drinking water, and then you can see a boost in the health profile of those communities.
Absolutely.
And I saw the device. It's a device that NASA uses to, of course, in space, we can't bring all the water to space, so you have to recycle.
Yes.
And in the recycling process, you have to have purification.
Yes.
So that's the same technology you're talking about using.
Some of it, and what was remarkable was that we have some very capable Ethiopian scientists, and why not use space technology like satellite imaging to determine weather patterns, weather conditions, why not, utilize it for further purposes in transforming lives on Earth? And there are so many people within NASA who have the goodwill. And in fact, I had the privilege of meeting General Bolden, the current administrator, who's been to Ethiopia,
Yes.
who knows the challenges. So I think that their involvement would be so welcome, because they could make a tremendous difference.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And I just want to thank you for the Water Initiative. And now we want to talk about the whole idea of the African diaspora. We know the Ethiopian diaspora is huge here in Washington. They're very much involved in certain aspects of the restaurant business and the parking lot business, and have done very well for themselves. We also know that the African diaspora, if it's linked in solidarity and in development initiatives, finance, there's much that can be done. What are your views on the importance of that sort of networking for development of Africans at home and abroad?
I think it's very, very important, because there's so many now around the world. Some of our brightest scientists, doctors, entrepreneurs, all living in different parts of the world. And as you mentioned, in this particular area, we have remarkable Ethiopians who've done very well in business. We should all be proud of them. But they've been a remarkably hard-working community who've also maintained their culture. So if you were to count the number of churches that have been established in this area, it gives you to the extent of their devotion not only to their faith, but also preserving their culture.
Yes.
So these people's interaction now, because since the revolution they've been spread to all corners of the world, they can bring so much back to the country and to the continent.
Yes.
Where a lot of Ethiopians still live also on the African continent, and have done very well also in business in different parts of Africa. But that interaction, I think, ultimately will lead to a lot of good things.
Yes. I think it would be remiss of me if I did not thank you and Brigadier General Copley and Mr. Stevens even for the friendship with us and all from over all these years. We consider ourselves obedient servants of the Crown Council. You're president of the Crown Council. Tell us a little bit about the Ethiopian Crown Council and the Ethiopian Imperial Order Society.
Well, the Imperial Crown Council in the past was one of the last institutions that was primarily an advisory body to a reigning emperor. Of course, since the revolution, being in exile, what we have tried to make the Crown Council a focus on is the preservation of culture and the history, and also to be involved in education as well as in projects that can transform lives, be it through the water purification system or transferring other technologies that can help people in Ethiopia and elsewhere on the continent.
Yes, so the Crown Council therefore has a definitive development mission.
Absolutely.
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 Yeah, and on the heritage preservation side,
Yes.
is that where you see the Imperial Order Society?
Yes, pretty much. And to also award those who have done extremely good service to the cause of both the Crown, and also to helping Ethiopia develop ideas and initiatives.
Indeed. Your Imperial Highness, we had thought that we would have been able to cover all of the ground in the time we had this afternoon, May 5th of 2016. I know there's much more that we can say. Let me just close with this by asking you, what are your views on the prospects for Africa in the 21st century and its diaspora in that fashion?
I think the mission of the new African Union certainly takes into account diaspora contributions, and despite the limitations imposed, it's a great organization that has yet its best years to come ahead of it. I think that will take effort from both people and governments to set targets that are achievable, and there's no reason why it cannot be a great continental body.
Prince Ermias, it's been a great honor and pleasure to have been of service all these years, and I look forward to us being even more productive in assisting the Crown Council of Ethiopia in its development mission across not Ethiopia only, but all of Africa, and in your leadership in forging strong links with the Caribbean diaspora and the African American diaspora. We're here in the last year of President Obama,
Yes.
Someone of African descent.
Yes.
East Africa, just like Ethiopia,
Yes,
Kenya,
yes.
and as someone who is a student of world politics and strategy, any final words on the United States and its relationship with Africa and Ethiopia? Of course, the United States has been a great friend of Ethiopia.
Very much so. The United States has been an ally, and His Majesty was very admirably fostered friendships with 5 presidents, I believe, including President Eisenhower, Kennedy, Nixon, Johnson. So there's a very strong link to America. It is our second home. This is where I went to school. I raised my kids and had my children. So it's my second home.
As a matter of fact, tell us about Princess Saba.
Saba was with me on the trip to Jamaica, and I'm very fortunate to have such a companion and a wife, a loving wife.
Yes, and tell us about the 2 princes.
I have a set of twin boys, Christian and Rufayet. They're 24 years old.
Amazing.
It's hard to believe.
Amazing. I remember them
They were very young.
when I first met you.
So they're also living in this area now. So we have many blessings to count. And on the closing, I hope President Obama becomes more involved in issues that affect our continent and affect also people of African descent. Certainly, we could use more spokespeople and champions on that front.
Thank you very much. Prince Ermias,
Thank you very much.
it's been a
Thank you.
blessing.
It's a
God bless
pleasure.
you. And of
Thank
course, we thank Mr. Alfaro for putting this all together. And, friends, for those who in time to come will view this, truly it's been an honor and privilege to be associated with His Imperial Highness and his humanitarian leadership and that of those arrayed with him. Much, much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.